Karen walked into the palace courtyard with her usual pride. She liked attention, and whenever she stepped somewhere grand, she believed all eyes should be on her. That day, the palace was open for visitors. People from the town came to see the tall walls, the shining gates, and the gardens filled with flowers. The royal guard stood at every corner, their uniforms neat and their posture straight. They were trained to stay still, silent and respectful. Karen came with her cousin Mia, who was quiet and polite. Mia admired the palace and whispered about how beautiful it was. She told Karen to behave and enjoy the visit. But Karen had another thought in her mind. She had always believed she was cleverer and braver than others. She wanted to test the patience of a guard. As they walked closer to the main entrance, Karen noticed one guard standing tall, his eyes fixed forward, his hands by his sides. His face showed no reaction, no matter how many visitors passed by. Children laughed nearby, trying to make him smile, but he stayed still. This caught Karen's attention. She leaned toward Mia and whispered that she wanted to try something bold. Mia shook her head quickly and told her not to do anything foolish. "They are royal guards," Mia said softly. "They have rules and we must respect them." But Karen ignored her. She thought that if the guard was trained to be silent, then he would not dare to respond no matter what she did. She felt a thrill in her chest as she planned her action. Karen stepped closer to the guard. The crowd around them was busy, some taking pictures, some admiring the grand doorway. No one paid attention to her at first. She looked directly at the guard's face. He remained like a statue, his eyes firm and straight. Karen smiled to herself, lifted her hand, and with sudden boldness she slapped the guard lightly across the cheek. Gasps filled the air. A few people nearby turned instantly, shocked by what they had just witnessed. Mia covered her mouth in disbelief, her heart racing. She wanted to pull Karen away, but she was frozen in place. Everyone expected the guard to stay quiet, to continue his role without movement. After all, that was what people believed about royal guards. They never broke their silence. But something different happened. The guard blinked once, his jaw tightening. He slowly turned his head, his eyes moving toward Karen with a calm but powerful stare. It was not anger that filled his face, but a strong presence that made Karen's heart skip. The crowd fell silent, waiting to see what would happen next. Even Mia held her breath, unsure of what was about to unfold. The guard did not shout, and he did not push her away. Instead, he stepped forward with a steady movement, his boots pressing against the stone ground. Karen, who moments earlier had been so confident, felt her cheeks grow warm. For the first time, she realized she had gone too far. The guard's silence was not weakness. It was discipline. It was strength. He stood right in front of her now, his tall frame towering over her. He looked into her eyes for a long second. Karen felt smaller than she ever had before. The crowd whispered, waiting for a reaction. Would he call another guard? Would he speak for the first time? Would he let her go without a word? Mia grabbed Karen's arm, whispering that they should leave. But Karen could not move. She felt as if the ground beneath her feet was holding her still. She had thought the guard would remain silent forever. Yet his simple act of turning his head and stepping forward had shaken her more than any words could. Then something even more surprising happened. The guard raised his hand slowly, not in anger but in command. With a calm gesture, he signaled for another guard at the gate to come closer. The second guard stepped forward quickly, and the two stood side by side. The first guard gave a small nod. It was clear he had decided something, and Karen was now part of it. The people around watched with wide eyes. Some whispered that she would be punished. Others thought she might be taken out of the courtyard. But one thing was certain. The moment Karen believed she could embarrass a royal guard had now turned into a scene that no one would forget. Karen finally lowered her gaze, realizing that what was about to happen next would not only surprise her, but also shock everyone present. The crowd in the courtyard grew more curious as the second guard arrived. He stood firmly beside the first guard, waiting for instructions. His expression was just as calm, but his eyes showed that he was alert. Karen stood frozen in the middle, her confidence from earlier slipping away little by little. Mia's hands trembled as she pulled Karen's sleeve. She whispered that they should apologize and leave quickly before things got worse. But Karen, who always tried to act strong, hesitated. Deep inside, she felt nervous. Yet she also wondered if this moment could end without serious trouble. The first guard, the one Karen had slapped, finally made a movement that surprised everyone. He did not speak, but he pointed his hand toward the grand doorway of the palace. The second guard nodded and stepped closer to Karen and Mia. His voice was low but firm as he said they were required to follow him inside. The whispers in the crowd grew louder. People leaned toward each other, saying how strange it was to see guards take action in this way. Most visitors expected guards to remain silent and still no matter what happened. Now they were seeing something unusual, something that made the air tense. Karen felt her knees weaken. She had wanted attention, but not like this. She looked at Mia, hoping her cousin would speak on her behalf. Mia quickly bowed her head to the guard and promised they would cooperate. Together, the two cousins followed as the second guard led them through the entrance, while the first guard returned to his post, standing tall again as though nothing had happened. Inside the palace hallway, everything felt heavier. The stone floor echoed with each step. The walls were decorated with tapestries, and the quietness was almost too much to bear. Karen's heart beat faster. She wondered if she had made the biggest mistake of her life. The guard guided them to a waiting chamber. It was not a prison cell, but a small room with chairs, a table, and windows covered with curtains. The air smelled of polished wood and fresh flowers. The guard stood by the door, keeping watch, while a maid entered with a tray of water and set it on the table. She smiled politely but said nothing, then left quietly. Karen sat down slowly, her hands fidgeting. Mia looked at her with worried eyes. "Why did you do that?" Mia whispered. "What were you thinking?" Karen tried to answer, but no words came out at first. She finally muttered that she thought the guard would not respond, that it was only a joke to test his silence. Mia shook her head, saying that respect was important and that not everything was meant to be tested. Minutes later, the sound of footsteps filled the hallway again. The door opened and an older man entered. He was dressed not as a guard but in fine clothes, suggesting he held an important position in the palace. His presence carried authority, but his face was calm and patient. He looked at the two cousins before taking a seat across the table. "I am Thomas," he said in a steady voice, "advisor to the royal household. I was told of an unusual act in the courtyard. I would like to hear what happened in your own words." Mia quickly bowed her head and spoke respectfully. She explained that they had come as visitors, that she had no part in the action, and that she wished to apologize on behalf of her cousin. Thomas listened carefully, nodding slowly. Then he turned his eyes toward Karen. Karen swallowed hard. She wanted to avoid speaking, but Thomas's calm gaze waited patiently for her answer. Finally, she admitted what she had done. She told him she wanted to see if the guard would react, and she thought nothing serious would follow. She lowered her head and whispered that she was sorry. Thomas stayed silent for a moment, his hands folded on the table. Then he spoke gently but firmly. "The guards outside represent more than strength. They represent respect for the kingdom, for discipline, and for the people who visit here. To treat them without respect is not only unkind but also careless. Do you understand this?" Karen nodded quickly, her face turning red. She realized now that her actions had not been a harmless game. The silence of the guard was not weakness but honor. She had tried to mock it, and in return she had embarrassed herself before everyone. Thomas stood and looked at both cousins. "The matter will be noted," he said, "but more important is the lesson you take from this. Sometimes silence holds greater power than words, and sometimes one small act can bring greater consequences than we expect." He instructed the guard to escort them back outside. As Karen and Mia followed, the weight of his words stayed in Karen's heart. She had thought the day would end with laughter at her boldness, but instead, it was filled with a lesson she could not ignore. When they stepped out into the courtyard again, the same crowd was still there. People looked at her, curious and whispering, but the guard she had slapped stood unmoved just as before, as though nothing had happened. His discipline was stronger than any reaction she could have forced. Karen lowered her gaze as she walked past him, realizing that what had started as a bold act was only the beginning of something that would change her understanding forever. The sun was still bright above the palace courtyard as Karen and Mia stepped outside again. The air felt heavy on Karen's shoulders, not because of the weather, but because of the eyes that followed her. Visitors whispered as she walked past, some with curiosity, some with disapproval. For the first time, Karen felt that attention was not a prize but a burden. Mia walked close to her cousin, hoping the day would end peacefully now. She whispered that they should go back home before anything else happened. Karen nodded weakly, but something inside her told her that the matter was not over. The words of Thomas, the royal advisor, kept echoing in her mind. Silence holds greater power than words. She wondered why those words struck her so strongly. Instead of leaving, Mia suggested they sit in the palace garden for a while to calm down. The garden was wide, filled with tall trees, roses, and small fountains that sparkled in the sunlight. Families walked along the paths and children laughed near the water. The sight gave Mia comfort, and even Karen began to relax a little. They sat on a bench under a tree, away from the main crowd. Karen stared at the flowers, but her thoughts were restless. She kept thinking of the guard she had slapped. His silence was still in her mind, and she could not understand why it unsettled her so much. She had seen people react with anger before, she had seen people shout, but the calm strength of the guard felt different. It was as though his silence spoke louder than any words. As she sat there, a group of young visitors came into the garden. They were laughing and talking loudly, just as Karen had done earlier. They noticed a guard standing near the fountain, watching over the area. One boy from the group nudged his friend and said he wanted to make the guard smile. He began waving his arms and making faces in front of the guard, but the guard stayed still. The others laughed, clapping at his attempt. Karen watched them, and for the first time, she saw herself in their actions. She realized how foolish she must have looked when she thought she was being bold. The guard by the fountain remained steady, his presence commanding respect without a single word. Karen felt her cheeks grow warm again as she remembered the slap she had given. Mia noticed her cousin's expression and asked softly if she was thinking about what had happened. Karen nodded and admitted that she was beginning to understand. "I thought silence was weakness," she whispered, "but now I see it is stronger than anger. I thought I could make the guard look small, but instead I made myself look small." Mia placed a gentle hand on her cousin's shoulder. "It is good that you see it now," she said kindly. "Sometimes we need to stumble before we learn how to walk correctly." Just then, an unexpected sound interrupted them. The same advisor, Thomas, entered the garden. He walked calmly toward the bench where the cousins sat. Both of them stood up quickly, nervous about why he had come again. Thomas greeted them politely and asked if they were enjoying the garden. Karen bowed her head, unsure how to answer. He looked at her with the same steady eyes as before and said, "I can see you are thinking about what happened. That is good. Reflection is the first step toward change." Karen gathered courage to speak. She told him honestly that she was ashamed of what she had done. She said she now understood that the guard's silence was not weakness but discipline and respect. Her voice shook as she admitted that she wanted to make things right. Thomas listened carefully, then nodded. "The lesson is not only for you," he said. "Many people mistake silence for emptiness when in truth silence can carry great weight. It can show patience, control, and honor. The guard you tested has trained for years to hold that silence even when tempted. That is not something to mock, but something to admire." Karen felt her eyes sting with regret, but Thomas's words gave her hope. She asked him if there was a way to show her respect to the guard she had offended. Thomas thought for a moment, then replied that actions speak louder than apologies. If she wished to make it right, she must show respect, not only in words but in how she carried herself. Mia smiled softly, proud of her cousin for speaking with honesty at last. Karen felt a small spark of determination in her chest. She realized that the incident in the courtyard had given her a chance to grow. She could either walk away and forget it, or she could take the lesson and prove she had changed. As the sun lowered slightly in the sky, the garden became calmer. Karen sat back on the bench, but this time her heart was lighter. She did not know yet what action she would take, but she knew she wanted to make amends. And whatever happened next, it would not only surprise her, but also everyone who had seen her mistake. The next morning, Karen woke up early. She could not sleep well the night before because her thoughts kept returning to the guard she had disrespected. The palace visit had left a heavy mark on her mind. She kept hearing Thomas's words about respect and discipline, and she knew that if she wanted peace, she had to face the matter directly. Mia was still half asleep when Karen entered the small kitchen of their home. Karen's face looked different, calmer, but also determined. She poured water into a cup and told Mia that she wanted to return to the palace that day. Mia looked at her with surprise. "Why would you go back?" she asked softly. "Is it not enough that you apologized to Thomas?" Karen shook her head. "It is not enough. I want to show that I truly respect the guard. I cannot just walk away after what I did. If I avoid it, the lesson will mean nothing." Mia hesitated. She worried that another visit might bring more embarrassment. But at the same time, she saw the seriousness in Karen's eyes. Her cousin had always been proud, but now that pride was turning into something more thoughtful. So Mia agreed to go with her. When they arrived at the palace courtyard again, the guards stood in their usual places, tall and silent. Visitors moved about, taking pictures, whispering to each other about the beauty of the grand walls. Karen's heart raced as her eyes searched for the same guard she had slapped. There he was, standing near the gate, his posture perfect, his gaze steady. He looked the same as before, as though nothing had ever happened. His silence and discipline made him appear untouchable, like a part of the palace itself. Karen took a deep breath. She wanted to step forward, but her feet felt heavy. Mia gave her an encouraging nod. Slowly, Karen walked across the courtyard. People noticed her and began whispering. Some remembered her face from the day before. The moment grew tense as she stopped a few steps away from the guard. Karen bowed her head deeply. She spoke clearly, her voice trembling but honest. "I was wrong," she said. "I disrespected you when you deserved only respect. You showed patience when I showed foolishness. I have come back to apologize." The guard, as expected, did not answer. He stood still, his eyes looking forward, but something subtle changed. His posture softened slightly, and though he did not move his lips, his silence felt kinder than before. The crowd around them grew quiet. Some visitors smiled softly, impressed by Karen's courage to return. Karen stood there for a few more seconds, hoping her words were enough. She knew she could not expect a reply, but in her heart she felt that the silence itself was an answer. It was forgiveness without words. It was understanding without expression. As she stepped back, Thomas appeared once again, as though he had been watching from a distance. He walked toward her, his calm presence drawing attention. "You have taken the first step," he said. "Respect is not only an apology, but in how you choose to live after the mistake. What you did today was not for the guard alone. It was for everyone who saw you yesterday, and everyone who sees you now. You have shown that courage is not in testing others, but in correcting yourself." Karen felt her chest grow lighter. The shame she carried was beginning to fade. For the first time, she felt proud not of her boldness, but of her humility. She nodded at Thomas with gratitude. Mia smiled, relief shining in her eyes. The crowd slowly returned to their own tours of the palace, but many would remember the sight of a young visitor bowing before a guard who never spoke a word. It was a reminder to them that respect does not always need sound, and that silence sometimes speaks louder than voices. As Karen and Mia left the palace courtyard, the sun shone brightly above them. Karen looked at her cousin and said softly, "I feel lighter now. I think I understand more than I did yesterday." Mia nodded. "Understanding grows when we are willing to admit we were wrong." "That is the strength you discovered today." Karen smiled faintly. She knew this was not the end of her journey. The palace had taught her something she would carry far beyond its gates. She had learned that silence, respect, and discipline could shape a person more deeply than pride ever could. What had begun as a careless act had turned into a lesson she would never forget. Days passed after the visit to the palace, but Karen's mind remained busy. She thought often about the guard, about the bow she had given, and about Thomas's words. For the first time in her life, she felt that she had been given a chance to grow into someone better. The lesson of silence and respect followed her even in simple moments at home. Mia noticed the change in her cousin. Karen, who once wanted attention everywhere she went, now preferred quiet. She no longer rushed to speak first, and she listened more carefully when others were talking. She also treated people with more kindness. If she saw someone working hard, she thanked them instead of ignoring their effort. Mia felt proud because she saw a new Karen taking shape. One afternoon, Karen and Mia were invited to a small-town gathering. The mayor had organized a celebration for the harvest season, and many families came together to share food, music, and stories. The event was lively, and people laughed as children played around the square. Karen and Mia joined a table with a few neighbors. At first, everything was cheerful, but soon a small conflict began. Two young men argued loudly over a simple matter. One claimed that his stall had been given less space than another, while the other shouted back that it was fair. The voices grew sharper, and the crowd started watching them. Karen sat quietly listening. Before, she might have laughed at the fight or even added her own bold words. But now she remembered the palace guard and the meaning of silence. She decided not to add to the noise. She waited, thinking about what Thomas had said. Respect is not only an apology but in how you live after the mistake. When the argument grew too heated, the mayor tried to calm the men, but they ignored him. That was when Karen stood up. She walked toward the men with steady steps. People looked at her, surprised that she was stepping into the middle of the quarrel. Karen raised her hand politely and spoke in a calm voice. "Please stop shouting. We are here to celebrate together, not to divide ourselves. If there is a problem, we can solve it with respect, not with noise." The two men paused, surprised by her tone. Her voice was not commanding, but it carried weight. The crowd also fell silent, waiting to see how the men would respond. Karen continued, "I know what it means to disrespect someone. I made that mistake once, and I learned that anger and mockery do not build anything. They only break. If you believe in fairness, then speak with fairness, not with shouting." The men looked at each other, then lowered their voices. The mayor stepped in again and helped them measure the stalls more carefully. The problem was solved without further trouble. The crowd clapped softly, not for Karen's boldness, but for her courage to bring calm in a moment of noise. Mia's eyes shone with pride. She knew that Karen's words had come from her heart, shaped by the lesson of the palace guard. Karen returned to her seat quietly, not seeking praise, but people around whispered that they admired how she had handled the situation. Later that evening, as the event ended, Mia asked her cousin how she had found the strength to step forward. Karen smiled and said, "I remembered how the guard stood without words and how his silence spoke louder than anything I had ever seen. I wanted to honor that lesson. I wanted to show that I had changed." Mia nodded, feeling grateful for the palace visit that had once seemed like a mistake, but had now turned into a gift. As they walked home under the stars, Karen looked up at the sky and thought about how life had changed. A careless act had turned her into the subject of whispers, but it had also opened a door inside her heart. She realized now that every choice mattered, even the small ones. Respect, silence, and discipline could shape not only a guard in a palace, but also a simple visitor like herself. She did not know what the future held, but she felt certain of one thing. The lesson she had learned would guide her in many moments ahead, and one day, it might lead her back to the palace for a reason greater than an apology. A few days after the harvest celebration, Karen received an unexpected invitation. A small envelope, sealed with gold wax, was delivered to her home. Her name was written neatly on the front. Mia looked at it curiously as Karen carefully opened the letter. Inside, she read that the royal palace had invited her to return for a special event. Karen's eyes widened. She had not expected this. The letter explained that the king wished to meet visitors who had shown courage and respect during their visits. Karen felt a mixture of excitement and nervousness. She remembered the guard and Thomas's words. This was not a moment for pride or attention. It was another chance to learn and grow. Mia smiled at her cousin. "It seems your actions are making a difference," she said softly. Karen nodded, feeling a little more confident, but also aware that she had to be careful. This time she wanted her behavior to reflect what she had truly learned. On the day of the event, Karen and Mia arrived at the palace early. The courtyard was already busy with people dressed in their best clothes. Royal guards stood at every entrance, tall and silent as ever. Karen felt her heart race as she noticed the same guard she had once slapped. He stood at his post, calm and disciplined. This time Karen bowed slightly when she approached him. She did not speak, but her gesture was full of respect. The guard's eyes briefly met hers, and she felt a quiet acknowledgement in his gaze. It was not approval or punishment, it was understanding. Karen realized that she had earned a small measure of trust simply by showing humility. Thomas appeared again, smiling gently. "Karen, Mia, welcome," he said. "Today is a celebration, not only of the kingdom but of those who have shown growth and courage. We are glad to have you here." Karen followed Thomas into a grand hall filled with people. The room was bright with sunlight streaming through tall windows. Tapestries decorated the walls and tables held arrangements of flowers and fruits. The king himself sat on a slightly raised platform, watching as visitors entered. Karen felt nervous but steady. She remembered that the day was not about attention. It was about respect. During the ceremony, several visitors were called to the front to share small stories of kindness, courage, or learning. Karen listened carefully, noticing that each story had a simple but powerful message. Some people had helped strangers, Others had shown patience, and some had learned lessons the hard way. Every story reminded her that growth often comes quietly, without applause. Finally, Thomas spoke to the king privately for a moment, and then motioned for Karen to step forward. Her legs felt shaky, but she walked calmly. The king smiled warmly at her. "I have been told of a visitor who learned an important lesson during a palace visit," he said. "Would you like to share what you have learned?" Karen bowed her head slightly and spoke clearly. "Your Majesty, I once acted foolishly and disrespected a royal guard. I thought his silence was weakness, but I learned that his patience, discipline, and honor were stronger than words. I also learned that respect is not only shown through apologies, but through actions and behavior. I have tried to live by that lesson since that day." The king nodded with approval. He looked at the guard, who stood silently nearby, and then back at Karen. "Your words show thoughtfulness and humility. You have learned well. Remember, respect and courage are not always about action. They are often about patience, understanding, and quiet strength." Karen felt a warm sense of accomplishment. She did not feel proud in the way she once did, but satisfied in a deeper way. She had grown beyond a careless act, and she knew that her actions now reflected her inner change. After the ceremony, visitors mingled in the hall. Karen noticed the guard walking past, still silent and steady. She smiled quietly to herself, feeling grateful. The guard had taught her more than any words could, and his presence reminded her that true strength often appears in quiet moments. As the sun began to lower, Karen and Mia left the palace together. Karen felt a sense of peace she had never known before. The lesson of respect, patience, and courage had become a part of her. She knew that life would continue to test her, but she was ready to face it with the wisdom she had learned. The days after the palace ceremony felt different for Karen. She no longer sought attention for herself, and she noticed small changes in the way people treated her. They respected her not because of her boldness, but because of the quiet confidence she carried. She began to understand that true respect and trust were earned, not demanded. Mia observed the change and felt proud. Karen spent her mornings helping at home, assisting neighbors, and being kind to those who needed support. The lessons of patience, discipline, and respect that she had learned at the palace were becoming a part of her daily life. Karen realized that growth was a slow process, built through repeated choices rather than a single act. One afternoon, the town announced a special visit by the royal guards. They were coming to the town square to teach children about discipline, courage, and respect. Karen and Mia decided to attend. The square was filled with families, children, and teachers. Everyone was eager to learn from the guards, who moved with calm precision and careful attention to their duties. Karen's heart beat faster as she saw the same guard who had once faced her slap. He was at the front, demonstrating how to stand tall and remain calm under pressure. Karen watched closely, remembering the lesson he had taught her. She realized that what made him strong was not just physical training, but his ability to control his mind and emotions. During the demonstration, a small boy tripped near the guard. He looked frightened and began to cry. The guard did not scold him or show frustration. Instead, he knelt slightly, his voice gentle, and helped the boy to his feet. Karen noticed that the same patience she had seen in the courtyard was now applied in a different situation. It was kindness wrapped in discipline, a balance she admired deeply. Mia whispered to Karen that this was a moment to learn even more. Karen nodded, feeling a sense of connection to the guard. She realized that respect was not only about actions she took toward him, but also about learning from his example. She decided she wanted to share what she had learned with others, especially children who looked up to the guards. After the demonstration, the guards allowed children to ask questions. Karen stepped forward, holding Mia's hand lightly. "Excuse me," she said politely. "I have learned a lesson from your silence and patience. Can you tell us how we can be strong and disciplined without being harsh to others?" The guard who had once faced her looked at her, calm and steady. He nodded slightly, acknowledging her question. He explained that strength is measured by self-control, that patience is learned through practice, and that true courage is shown when we act with respect and kindness. Karen listened carefully, absorbing every word. When the session ended, the guard approached Karen quietly. He did not speak aloud, but his gesture of nodding toward her carried a message. Karen felt that he recognized her growth. She bowed slightly, feeling a deep sense of gratitude. She knew that her journey had transformed her more than she could have imagined, As the crowd dispersed, Karen and Mia walked home together. Karen's mind was full of thoughts about patience, respect, and courage. She realized that the lessons from the palace, from the slap, and from the guard's silence were now part of her. She no longer needed attention to prove herself. True strength was quiet, steady, and consistent. That evening, as the sun set and the sky turned golden, Karen sat by the window, reflecting on her journey. She understood that mistakes were not the end but the beginning of learning. Her encounter with the guard had taught her humility, patience, and respect in ways she would never forget. Karen knew that life would continue to present challenges. There would be moments when she might be tempted to act without thinking. But now she carried within her the wisdom of the palace guard, and the lesson that silence and discipline often speak louder than words. She felt ready for whatever came next. Weeks passed, and Karen felt that her life had changed in quiet but meaningful ways. She no longer rushed to show bravery through bold actions. Instead, she considered her choices carefully, knowing that patience and respect held more power than any loud gesture. Every day she remembered the palace guard's silence and the lessons he had taught her. One morning, a letter arrived at Karen's home. It was sealed with the royal emblem. Karen's hands trembled slightly as she opened it. The message inside invited her to participate in a special program at the palace, designed to teach young visitors about leadership, respect, and discipline. Karen felt both excited and nervous. She understood that this invitation was a sign of trust, not a reward. It was an opportunity to grow further and share what she had learned. Mia, as always, accompanied her. She noticed how calm Karen had become. "You have really changed," she said softly. Karen smiled, realizing that she now felt stronger inside, even if she no longer sought attention. This visit would not be about pride. It would be about learning and sharing. Upon arriving at the palace, Karen noticed the same guards as before. They stood tall, silent, and attentive. Her heart raced when she saw the guard who had once faced her slap. He looked at her briefly, and Karen bowed respectfully. She did not speak, but her gesture communicated her gratitude and understanding. The program began in a large hall filled with children and young visitors. Thomas, the royal advisor, welcomed everyone. "Today is not about showing who is bold or clever," he said. "It is about learning the qualities that make someone strong inside: patience, respect, and discipline. You will learn from the guards who serve this palace, and you will also have a chance to share what you have learned in life." Karen listened carefully as the guards demonstrated how to remain calm, even in difficult situations. They explained how self-control helped them make better decisions, and how respect for others guided their actions. Karen thought about her own journey, about the moment she slapped the guard and how much she had grown since then. When it was time for participants to speak, Karen took a deep breath. She stepped forward and addressed the group. "I want to share a lesson I learned," she said. "I once thought silence was weakness. I acted without thinking and disrespected someone who deserved respect. I learned that patience, discipline, and quiet strength are more powerful than bold actions or loud words. We can show courage and kindness at the same time. We can lead without being harsh, and we can respect others while learning from them." The children listened with wide eyes. Some nodded, some whispered to each other. Karen felt a warmth in her chest. For the first time, she was teaching others the very lesson she had learned from the palace guard. Her words were simple, but they carried the weight of real experience. After the session, the guard who had once faced her slap approached. He did not speak, but he gestured with a slight nod. Karen understood the message clearly. His silence spoke of acknowledgement and trust. She bowed again, feeling gratitude and respect, not shame or fear. As the program ended, Thomas approached Karen. "You have grown well," he said kindly. "Your actions and words show that lessons are not learned by chance but by reflection and courage. You have turned a mistake into a path of wisdom." Karen smiled, feeling a quiet pride that was different from the pride she had felt before. It was calm, steady, and meaningful. She realized that the journey from a careless action to understanding and respect was more rewarding than any moment of attention she had once sought. That evening, Karen and Mia walked home through the quiet streets of their town. Karen felt a deep sense of peace. She knew life would continue to bring challenges, but she now had the inner strength to meet them with patience, respect, and courage. The palace, the guard, and the lessons she had learned would stay with her forever. Karen understood that true bravery was not in testing others or seeking attention. True bravery was in learning from mistakes, showing respect and growing quietly every day. And in that quiet strength she had found a power greater than she had ever imagined.